Hello YouTube, my name is Tristan. Welcome back to L-Space Books. Welcome to the channel if you're new. Welcome back if you're returning. I'm going to have my voice a little lower today just because I'm filming while my partner is still sleeping. I'm very much a morning person. He is very much a night owl, and so we tend to have these sort of like offset schedules, but we're both very much introverts, so it works out well where I have my mornings basically to myself, where I can read, have my coffee, hang out with the cats, do all of those things, and then he can have his nights to do his reading or to go and play video games or whatever that he wants to do. So it's nice, but then it also is like slightly inconvenient when I'm trying to film while it's still daylight, but you know, such is life. C'est la vie, as you would say in French. So I want to do my, I guess, it's a weekly wrap-up, it's a monthly wrap-up, it's also a check-in on 2025 reading goals, all of those things, as well as kind of go over what my reading plans are for the month of February. So without further ado, let's get started and look at the books that I read in January, and also finished last week. So I read 3 audiobooks, and for the purposes of my reading goals for 2025, I don't count them as part of my reading goals. And before you get up on me for not counting audiobooks in my like reading goals thing, just wait a second until I explain why I do that when I'm actually talking about my reading goals. So the 3 books that I read on audio through Libby, because I used my library for that, were That Summer by Jennifer Weiner, The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, and Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. Loved them all. With That Summer by Jennifer Weiner, I was honestly quite surprised. So it's one that my mom was pretty adamant that I read, and one that she was very captivated by, and one that kind of took her off guard, surprised her. And so I was curious. I thought that, why not give it a try? I've pushed her into reading enough books, I might as well, let it be some give and take, and so that I can, read some of the books that she wants me to read. And so I listened to it, and I really liked it. I was also quite caught off guard. It's sort of packaged as a beach read romance, basically, and I think it is marketed as a romance, especially when you look at the cover. Like, this is a very generic romance cover, but it was so much more literary than I was anticipating. It's also a very satisfying story. It's a very devastating story, and it's also one that is full of just beautiful human connection. And it's basically the story of 2 women that whose lives intersect in a variety of ways, and they eventually join up at the end to kind of deal with some things that happened one particular summer. The returning motif of That Summer happens a lot throughout the book, and it's very much in conversation with A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. And it is very interesting. Like, I'm a really big sucker for books that are in conversation with classics, whether they be plays or novels or whatever. And so the fact that this one was in conversation with that was really cool. And it was a nice surprise, and that's why I say that it was surprisingly literary for the way that it was marketed. So, like, it's sort of one of those ones that, like, it's one of those books that really makes you realize that this distinction between literary fiction and contemporary fiction is completely arbitrary, and it's kind of silly, but it is very much in the middle of those two, and it does happen to have a romance subplot within it that makes it, I guess, categorized as a romance, but it is so much more than what the marketing would have you believe, and so for that reason, I would highly recommend it. I don't remember what I rated it, but who really cares about star ratings that much? I certainly don't. The other one was a reread, which was The Lies of Locke Lamora. I'm getting ready to read the second book in the series after like 3 years of having it on my shelf and not reading it. I am feeling the itch for some really good fantasy, as well as some nautical nonsense. It is something that I wish. And so I am really excited to read Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch. And, The Lies of Locke Lamora is certainly one of my favorite fantasy novels and fantasy, like, beginning of some fantasy series, like, ever. I think it has one of the most detestable villains that I have ever encountered, and, like, such interesting characters, such an interesting setting, such a fun, just heist romp thing. It's just delightful, and I love the story. So that was a great reread. It was a great listening experience. It was a great return to some characters that I love and a story that I love for sure. And then last was not Kings of the Wild, Bloody Rose, the sequel to Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. And same thing, loved it. I think that it resolved a lot of things that were going on in Kings of the Wild, and also things that were set up in Kings of the Wild that were, left open and, left for the next book to pick up on and finish, and it certainly did. And Kings of the Wild was one of my all-time favorite books of last year, and it's kind of become one of my favorite fantasy books of all time, because it is such a wonderful love letter to D&D that it's like, and it plays on so many tropes from Dungeons & Dragons and yet remains so original. It's very funny. It takes like those common tropes of Dungeons & Dragons and then twists them and sort of turns them on their head, and is very, again, surprising and original, and it's very fun. And Bloody Rose was such an interesting follow-up to Kings of the Wild. I think that in tone, it's very different. I think that it is dealing with more of the ethical issues of Kings of the Wild. Kings of the Wild is very much like not very much. It's a more or less traditional adventure party story that is going off on a quest to save the world. And Bloody Rose is more dealing with the emotional and ethical dilemmas that, again, were hinted at and presented in Kings of the Wild, but then were not fully fleshed out, and now they are, while still having a incredible catastrophic and cataclysmic battle at the end that was just so cool. And necromancers are scary. That's what this whole book was about. But it was great. Fantastic. I loved it. And I was devastated by the ending. And also my heart was warmed by the ending. And the character Tam, throughout the entire thing, is just such a cool character. And her growth, witnessing that, just read the series. It's really good. I think you'll like it, especially if you like fantasy. So just do it. For me. Okay? Thanks. Now, as far as physical books that I read, which are the ones that count for my 2025 reading goals, I finished Volume 1 of Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, and I loved it. Painting in broad strokes, this is basically the conflict between human/civil law versus divine/God's law. And we see that play out in the conflict between Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert. Javert is the embodiment of the adherence to human civil law and government, and basically like faith in the human system, whereas Jean Valjean is the embodiment of the adherence to what, I guess, according to Hugo, is Christliness, in the Christian tradition. Now, I am very much not religious or spiritual, for that matter. I tend to be a little bit antagonistic of such things, in my darker moments, but I can nonetheless appreciate what is being said and what is being demonstrated, because the things that Jean Valjean is sort of, the things that Hugo is promoting through Jean Valjean are basic human decency, compassion, and charity, mercy, grace, all of those things that you don't need to follow any particular faith tradition to embody. Like, those are just things that make the world a better place. And so while Hugo's thesis is that following a godly life or a Christ-like life is what will lead to prosperity and goodness in the world, he also demonstrates the fact that if you embody compassion and charity and grace, you will be a good person, and the people around you will be uplifted from their misery to a better station in life. And so whether you believe in God or not, it is a beautiful moral treatise on the power of what we will just categorize as goodness, and the fact that good people will disobey bad laws. And given what has, come down from the executive branch here in the United States within the past unfortunate number of days, I think is a very relevant little quip that we can all take away. And, this is also a story kind of a revolution against a corrupt government, so I'm going to be very much enjoy getting to that as this continues on. So, this was a great book. Very much enjoyed it. The writing was great, surprisingly readable. Yeah, just overall fantastic experience. The next book that I finished last night, which was January 31st, so hello February, was Mothers and Sons by Adam Haslett. Now, I don't think I mentioned this at all, but aside from the fact that it was like the Alstora, Eric Cervini's Very Gay Book Club pick of the month, and this was it. I finished it. This is an interesting book. It's not my favorite that we've had from the book club, and it's certainly not what I would consider the best, but yet it is also a very interesting one, and it's turning out to be very timely because it's about an immigration lawyer who is helping asylum seekers, seek asylum and get put on the path of green card eligibility and all of that. But it's also the story of the main character, Peter, sort of reconciling with an event that happened in his past that has caused him and his mother to become estranged from each other. And so it's a parallel narrative of both Peter and his mother, Anne, who is now this, sort of hippie, what is even the word, owner? It's not really an owner, but just like co-owner of a women's retreat up in Vermont. She's a former pastor, and then she runs it with basically her wife/partner now and a third woman named Roberta, and they it's a place for women who are going through, whether it be burnout or reconciling with trauma from sexual assault or something like that. They can go to this retreat and kind of be rejuvenated in a way. And they take it from the spiritual, the psychological, and the social ways, and they do these. Anyway, it's interesting. It was the part that I was most skeptical about in the beginning, but what I ended up finding to be quite interesting as we continued on in the narrative. The motif of mothers and sons returns throughout the whole book. Obviously, the main mother and son pairing is that of Peter and Anne, but also there is Jared and Susan, there's Felipe and Sandra, there's, I don't know how to pronounce Albanian names, but I'm just going to say Vasil and his mother. Just like a lot of different mother and son relationships that were very interesting to see all kind of embroiled within the central narrative. I found overall the story to be very engaging, and I really liked the parts detailing the immigration law and like the immigration lawyer bits with Peter. I did find some of the writing to be a little clunky, that to the point where it felt like the author Haslett was trying to kind of play with language in a way that was like inconvenient. What's the correct word? Cumbersome, perhaps. Let me see if I can find. I mean, of course, if I try to find an example in here, I'm not going to, but just take my word for it that there were several occasions where I was just like, why did you need to word it like that? Like, that's not, just didn't make sense, and it didn't, there's not really, people don't talk like this in some ways, and so, I just felt a little annoyed with some of the pieces of description or whatever. I guess, like, how full of shame it is to be lonely, and I think that given the context of what happened, it just didn't make a lot of sense. Like, it would have made more sense, given the context of that section, for it to be reversed, how lonely it is to be full of shame. I don't know. There's another section where it was like, the sky was full of gray cloud that descended upon whatever, and the fact that it was cloud singular was just strange. Like, we don't say that ever. Gray clouds or gray cloud cover. Like, it just rubbed me the wrong way. And then there was one other one. It was like, it's there that her gaze fell. No, it was worse than that. Like, the wording that I just gave it was better than the way that it was worded in the book. But anyway, I think that what I said was like how I would have rewritten it to make it sound better. It was there that her gaze fell. It was there that captured her gaze. Something like that would have been better than the way that it was written, because it was very clunky, and it was just like, it took me out of the narrative. So that was odd. So as far as things that are in progress, I am continuing on with Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Very much enjoying it. I'm getting into some of the like wartime poetry in here, and I am very much enjoying his sort of analysis, and not necessarily analysis, but his just like thoughts on war and conflict and the cost of all of that. And yeah, it's great. Walt Whitman's a great poet, and he's real gay, and I like that. I am also doing a read-along with Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads, as well as, like, there's a lot of other people that are doing it, of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, and we're currently on Swann's Way. I have been following the discussion in the Discord, but because I am only 213 pages in, I've not fully engaged, because like occasionally I will see what like looks like they could be spoilers, and so I like, okay, cool, I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna reserve that discussion for later until I finish this. So far I am enjoying it. One thing I will say is that this particular edition has renewed and refreshed my loathing of deckled edges. It has been a very frustrating physical reading experience. Hate them. But as far as the actual book goes, the actual content, it's lovely. It's a book that definitely makes you think, and it's a book that I think requires a lot of thinking. And so I'm sort of at this midpoint of this book where I'm questioning the necessity, or questioning the practicality, I think is the right word, and I think that was the word I was looking for earlier with Mothers and Sons. It was that a lot of the wording was impractical. It like just disrupted the flow and made it difficult to, took me out of the narrative, whatever. So this, again, I'm also kind of conflicted on the practicality of the language. This is a difficult book. I think, just plain and simple, it is a difficult book to read. And I'm glad that I'm reading in English, not in French, because I would have been lost. I would have probably had to quit, because I have tried to read this in French before, and it just didn't work. Now I actually am able to get through it, and I am, again, enjoying it. But the way that it's sort of making sense to me is to view it as a sort of the difference between the technical mastery of, say, the technical mastery of realism in painting, right? So you have the people that take such care and attention to the minutest detail in the painting, to where you see the translucency of a person's skin, where you can see the veins in the hands of a person sitting, and all of the detail of the shadow and the crinkling of the dress, to where you feel like you could just like reach out and touch the silk of a dress or a coat or whatever. And that's kind of what this feels like to me, is that it is, again, very meticulous and very descriptive, and the way that the language is in the book is like verging on incomprehensible. It is pushing the boundaries of what is intelligible language. And it does it successfully, for sure. Like, I don't think I'm selling it particularly well, but I'm also not trying to sell it. I'm just trying to give you my thoughts. The writing is still very good. It's just like there's a lot of subclauses and a lot of commas and semicolons, and a sentence can run on for half a page, and it's just like you do have to spend a lot of time sort of understanding what's going on. And if you're looking for that experience, it's great. And for me, that was the experience that I was looking for. And so for that reason, I am very satisfied with that. I don't think that this book is for everybody. I do think that if you are looking to get into like the sort of masterworks of literature, this is a must read. But it's not one that you should pick up and read casually by any stretch of the imagination or by any means. I love the recurring motifs of things like the hawthorn, the lilacs, the steeples. I think that all of those things keep returning, and it's sort of like cyclical, to where you really understand all of the things that the narrator's mind is returning to, and the description and the love that he has for all of these things is just really interesting. And like his mother want, his just like how his mental health and the quality of emotional state is determined by whether or not he gets a goodbye kiss from his mother is both entertaining and also just like a fascinating psychological thing, a psychological observation and maybe case study or whatever. But yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I like the Lydia Davis translation quite a lot. I don't have the Moncrief Enright version, so I can't really compare. But this is very readable. I think the translation is good. There was one section that I would like to refer to in the original French, so I am going to get the French version. Just like, it was just the use of a pronoun that in French, it just like confused me. Basically, like, the pronoun elle can be both she and it referring to a noun that is of the feminine gender, and it was in a space that was connected, like it was in the same space as person, which in French is la personne, which is a feminine noun. And there's just like the way that the sentence was worded, Davis translated it as she, but I am wondering if the actual translation, or like the actual French, the elle in question is referring to la personne, which would have made it more, it could have potentially been a gender-neutral sentence, which I just don't know. And that's something that I'm curious about, and so I want to get the original French so that I can cross-reference. But yeah, it's great. It's fun. And yeah, hard, don't get me wrong, but I am enjoying it nonetheless. I'm continuing on with my biography of Victor Hugo, not mine, the one that was written by Robb. Fascinating, love it, and I'm enjoying reading that alongside Les Mis, even though I haven't actually made a lot of progress, but I'm at 52 pages, it's fine. It's not inconsiderable. Now, let's check in on some 2025 reading goals. Now, I mentioned that audiobooks are not, I don't count them for my overall reading goal of 2025, and that's half true. So my reading goal for 2025 is to read 7,000 pages, which the goal of that is to prioritize physical reading because I tend to have a more profound experience when I'm reading in physical versions. I can underline things. I just enjoy that a little more. In previous years, I have had, a tally of books be my reading goal. 75 books is how many I wanted to read by the end of the year. Last year, I far exceeded that. But it made me want to read, again, smaller books. It made me want to read shorter audiobooks so that I could get through more things. And it made me want to prioritize taking books that I had in physical versions to listen to them on audio so that I could have just speed up the reading process. And so it just gave me a very unhealthy, or I guess not necessarily unhealthy, but just a disagreeable relationship to my listening of audiobooks. And so by having my reading goal be physical pages, 7,000 physical pages, it's returned my, I guess, just joy of audiobooks. I do count them as books, don't worry. Listening to books is still technically reading. It is still technically consuming the book. It counts. It just doesn't count for my goal. Now, I do still have a numerical goal of 75 books that I'm wanting to read, but that I'm not paying as close attention to that as I am to my goal of reading 7,000 pages. So, that said, as far as where I am, you will have noticed that I read a lot of books. I read a lot of pages. You will have seen the actual physical books were quite large, and so I read 1,125 pages in January. It's a lovely round number, and I love that it ends in a 5. It's fun, and the reason, and I'm realizing that was very much correct in boosting my goal. So initially, I had set out to read 5,000 pages of books in 2025, and I realized that was not that many pages, to be honest. And so I was I need to boost that because Les Mis alone was 1,500. The Victor Hugo biography is 500. If I'm going to read all of Proust, that's 3,000 pages. So that's my goal done, by June, if we're being honest. And so I was okay, I need to boost that a little bit to kind of give myself a bit of a challenge. And I think I still didn't actually do that much because I do think that 7,000 is going to be pretty easy to get. However, I do like the mental space that I'm in now of trying to tally the pages that I've read versus the physical books, because I'm not rushing through books anymore. I'm picking books that have more pages. I'm not prioritizing the shorter books just to get through a 150-page book so that I can check it off on my reading goal, get 10 books as opposed to having 9 or whatever to get toward the 75 books or whatever. So the page number is working psychologically for me very well. And so from that standpoint, reading goals wise is doing pretty well. As far as February reading plans, this is now a 30-minute video. I'm going to go quick, hoping to get through this. En l'absence des hommes, In the Absence of Men by Philippe Besson. It is just a friendship and potentially love story. Marcel Proust is a character. It looks kind of cool. Then I will also be continuing on with Swann's Way. I'm going to be going on to the second book, the second volume of Les Mis, and I will also be reading Isaac's Song by Daniel Black, which is the February pick for the Alstora Eric Cervini's Very Gay Book Club. And this is an author who I've read before and really liked. It was Don't Cry For Me, which is all about a man writing sort of a letter to his gay son and sort of like reconciling with why the father reacted in such a way to his gay son's being gay. And the father's dying, and it's a beautiful story. And the other thing that was really cool was that there's a recipe for pound cake in the story, in like the narration, and it's like there's a scene where the grandmother, I think it's the grandmother and the son, Isaac, who are making pound cake, and like, I've made the pound cake in the book. Like, it gives you the recipe for it, and I think that's really cool. It's really good. It makes a ton of cake, like a ton of cake. I was shocked by how much cake. I was eating cake for like 2 weeks because of that recipe. It has like 8 eggs and like 6 cups of flour. Anyway, it's good. It's really good, and you should make it, and it's great with like blackberry compote and what. Anyway, getting off topic here, but yeah, that was like a fun surprise. So I'm very excited to read this, and this is sort of a follow-up or companion novel to Don't Cry For Me, and so for that reason I'm very excited to read it. I really did like Daniel Black's writing, and I think this one, from what I've heard of it, and just like the little bits that I've picked up, I'm very excited to get to this one. I think it's going to be lovely, and you know, it's also a great February Black History Month pick, so I'm excited for that. I also really like the cover. Like, look at this. Isn't it pretty? It looks like a blue jay, or maybe it's a magpie. I don't actually know, but I'm sure that will come into play as the novel gets going. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for another video. I am still hoping to get through some tag videos that I have a huge backlog of that I very much need to get to work on. But yeah, until then, once again, thank you for watching. See you again in the next video, and take care. Bye.